Hello and welcome to today's HDI webinar. We're very glad you've joined us for Preparing for the Future of Service Management, Key Considerations when Shopping for an ITSM ESM Platform. I'm Tim McElgan. I'm the Editorial Manager and Principal Analyst at HDI, and I'll be your host for today's session. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, simply hit the F5 key to refresh your browser window. If you need further assistance, just click on the yellow help icon below the slides and somebody will get right with you. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the discussion. To do that, simply type your questions into the Q&A window on the side of your screen and hit the submit button. Due to time constraints, we will only be able to answer a limited number of questions, but we'll get back to you as soon as we can after the session with any additional responses. Additional resources related to this discussion can be found in the resource list widget located in your console. And finally, today's presentation will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live event, and you will all receive an email reminder once that does become available. Okay, and with all that, I'm honored to introduce today's panelists, David Cannon, Jay Raymond, and Andrew Graff. David Cannon is known for crafting industry best practices for strategy and IT operations, which he uses to make organizations function more effectively and efficiently. He's a co-author and editor of multiple IT operations and strategy publications, and a recipient of multiple industry awards. David believes that successful digital strategy is an enterprise initiative that integrates technology from multiple internal and external sources to achieve business success. Jay Raymond is a U.S. Army veteran with 22 years of experience in all aspects of IT. Jay spent a decade and a half with managed service providers, managing help desks and doing field work, before settling into a multi-hat role as a senior network engineer at B&I Contractors. And finally, Andrew Graff is the Chief Product Strategist for Team Dynamics. His passion lies in helping organizations thrive in an ever-changing technology and service delivery environment. As a co-founder of Team Dynamics, Andrew is an industry thought leader, helping guide organizations as they work to increase their IT maturity. Thank you all for sharing your insight with us here today, and thanks to Team Dynamics for sponsoring today's webinar. So as we dive into our discussion today, I'd like to go ahead and start, set the stage for the conversation. So David, I'm going to start with you. What are the first steps for deciding whether a service management platform is the right choice for a given organization?
We can go through the standard list of checking consistency in architecture and functionality and so on, but I think there are some things that we need to be that we need to be very careful of, and things that we don't necessarily think of first. And one is, are we ready for this? Is our organization actually prepared for the kind of functionality that we're about to adopt and about to use? We have to ask questions like, who is this tool going to support? Do we know all of the stakeholders internally that are potentially going to be accessing or benefiting from this tool? We have to know whether there are dysfunctional aspects in our organization that we need to take care of before we think about the functionality of the tool. The reason I'm saying that is because very often we assume that the tool has practices that will clean up things that we're doing wrong. That actually doesn't work. So we need to make sure that our house is in order before we start assessing whether a tool is actually going to work for us or not. And I think something else is, another question we have to ask is, are we using this tool replacement or this new tool that we're looking at to try and do something new, something that we haven't been able to do using the old tool, or maybe that we just haven't had the budget for before, but now we've got this new tool, we have the budget, we're able to start thinking about new things to do. Are we ready for those new things? Are we culturally prepared for the things we have to do to be able to make those new things work? And then think about what those tools are able to offer. And the final thing I would say is to make sure that the tool that you're using is fit for the culture that you're using it in. And culture has many different aspects. For example, the kind of frameworks that you use to do work, the kind of practices that you have adopted within your organization, the integration between different parts of your organization, for example, development teams, project teams, and operational teams. All of these have to be well thought out. You can't just take a tool and adopt it with a completely different approach to how work is done than the approach that you're using today. So those for me are some of the less obvious things that we should look for when we are considering a new tool.
Great, thank you, David. Jay, I know that you've been through this process relatively recently. What did your team at BNI look at as you were trying to decide on what was the right service management platform? What were the types of features you needed? What were some of the sort of pre-work that you needed to get done?
We were actually kind of on the other side of what David was just saying. We got to a point where we had to find something else. We were at a point where we were growing more than the software we were using could help us with. So we started looking at, what other features are out there that'll help us to streamline our processes and make things simpler for us in the long run. And then from there, we decided what other features are there that don't fit what we're doing, but we can possibly implement later to make things even better. So it was a long term of digging through things and trying to find out what was actually going to work the best for us.
Sure. Yeah. Complex and challenging environment, especially with the pressure of we need to get it done. We need to get it done now.
Yeah.
Andrew, what do you suggest that decision makers in the situation evaluate about their businesses before they even get into the various features and benefits of a given platform?
Yeah, and I think what I'll add is just to augment what the others have already said. But for me, I think it's really important to sit down and think about the pains that you're looking to fix and the opportunities you want to take advantage of. So these are not features. These are stories. These are stories that resonate with lots of people in the organization. I think the ultimate success factor of any solution is that it is a widely agreed upon high impact pain or helps us take advantage of a big opportunity ahead of us, right? It helps prepare that organization because people can get behind it. So I think starting with what are those pains that are being caused by the lack of solution, right, or an inadequate solution, or what are those things that are going to carry our organization forward that we don't currently have, and why is that important, right? If we can tell a story about how impactful this tool is going to be, that's a great starting point. I think, any service management platform is going to manage tickets, right? That you're not going to find one that doesn't. Now, identifying how each platform best addresses your pain and those opportunities is really, in my opinion, most critical for understanding fit. I often suggest that a client break a solution evaluation into two pieces. The first are the table stakes, right? Does it do incident, problem, change, release, and any other of the ITIL, support any of the other ITIL processes that are relevant to you? Right. I also think that there are very few organizations that have quote unquote implemented ITIL because a lot of it isn't relevant. ITIL is a library. No one goes to a library and reads every book on the shelf. There are specific things that interest us. So make sure that a solution is very good at those specific things. And then secondly, evaluate how does it fix our pains? Because, a vendor is going to sit there and show you how they create a ticket, an incident problem change, or a case for HR service management, or a work order for facilities service management, right? Or for legal or marketing, whatever these other things are that people are managing. But asking a vendor to take the story of those pains or opportunities and walk through the solution and how does it fix that pain or address that opportunity. Because also I think vendors get hemmed in sometimes with an RFP that as yes or no, and it doesn't give them the opportunity to tell the story about, hey, we saw the pain articulated up front in the intro of that RFP, but these check boxes don't tell the story about how we do that. Yes, we're answering them factually, but it doesn't, and it's hard. I always, I think there should be a business in coaching people how to write RFPs so that they end up with the best solution. And I think that story is really important, or those set of stories. Show us how you fix this problem, right? Well, we got to get comfortable with the infrastructure and security and all that, all those things, right? Like you could take the traditional RFP and say, yeah, we have to do that. But I think that the extra second step is show us how you fix these big stinking problems that we have, or how you position us. I think that's probably, after 20 years of this, if I'm going to look for a service management platform, those are the types of things I'd be doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point on the story, because if you can't tell that story, you don't know what you're trying to fix, which means you're going to buy a tool. And as another one of our speakers has said in the past, a fool with a tool is still a fool. It's a dangerous thing.
You might miss something really important, right? If it's just a checklist of here's all the features that every product has, a lot of those are going to look the same, but you might miss the right solution because you didn't see how it addresses those big problems, right?
Yeah. As an analyst, we always used to say that our job is the so what, right? You can put data in front of people, you can give the broad outlines, but if you don't understand why you're asking the questions that you're asking, you're going to be in trouble. I'm going to stay with you, Andrew, on this one. Sure. As organizations are making those evaluations, how do decision makers balance the need of customers, whether those are internal or external, and the teams that are actually going to be using these tools, these platforms?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, and that's either because you're wise or you lack imagination. I'll let the viewers decide which. But I think it comes back again to the pains and those opportunities and prioritizing. I think when you talk about your internal and external customers, obviously there are some distinct needs. I don't think that I don't think it's a matter of excluding one or the other. I mean, most products should be able to support both. I think it's more about implementation priority. So saying, okay, what are the pains we have? And you could bifurcate that into internal and external, right? And then prioritize and say, well, what's going to make the biggest impact to our business? What's going to help us implement most effectively? And that just doesn't mean hitting our timeline. That also means adoption, right? When you look at those pains, you might say, okay, I've seen some really neat rubrics about, okay, how economically impactful is this particular pain or opportunity, but how much does this affect positively or negatively adoption? Because you might prioritize something earlier in your implementation that may not provide as much benefit to your external customers, but boy, it gets everyone bought in to this new platform. So I think those are just a couple things to think about. But again, I think it comes back to understanding what is it we're fixing here.
Great. I apologize, a little bit of dog noise in the background here. I'm going to fix that in a second. But David, let me turn to you. What are your, what are the must-haves from your perspective in terms of what a customer is expecting from these platforms? So, David, you're on mute, and I was on mute when I told you that.
There you go. Now you can blame the dog noise on me. There are quite a few things that a modern customer would need to look at. And I think first is the recognition that the task of managing technology today is not the same task that it was just 10 years ago. And a primary reason for that is because of cloud-based technologies that we have to support. And it's very different supporting a service where you do not own the actual equipment that service is run on, where you do not have a say over what that equipment is and where it is and so on. What you're dealing with is becoming a customer of those particular services. And I think one of the things to recognize is that if you're going to use a tool, that tool has to enable you to understand and articulate how to support those cloud services, how to anticipate the cost of those cloud services, how to manage activities and processes that run between a cloud service provider and their customer and the people who consume those cloud services in the organization. Very different. So that's one of the first things. It's not exactly a feature of the tool, but it is certainly a set of capabilities that you will need to look for. There is no way around that. I think the second thing that has changed in the industry is the emergence of a number of new frameworks, and that's fine. We've always had a lot of frameworks, but what's interesting about these frameworks is that they're all trying to solve different problems in the same area. And so it's very important that if you have different teams working with different frameworks in the organization, and they're all needing to collaborate in that organization, these tools need to be able to support the way each of them is working. Now, we used to solve that by having completely different tool sets. The problem is that these services are so integrated now that it's very difficult to manage them with multiple tool sets. So we should be looking for tools that integrate the way in which different teams work. And some of those will use a more agile way. Some of those will use a more sort of operations management type of approach. Some will use more of a manufacturing type of approach. The challenge is, how do you get them all to talk to each other using a consistent set of tools? And the answer is not to say, well, everyone has to fit in with one way of thinking, and then they all have to use the same tool. So you're suddenly confronted with a tool in service management where people are managing operations, and the first thing you have to do is set up a project. Well, why on earth would they want to set up a project when they're trying to manage an amalgamated set of technologies in a common environment? That's not a project, that's ongoing operations. So it's you cannot shoehorn different groups into working in a single way. Tools need to be able to support multiple ways of working. And along with that needs to come an expansion from the current ways in which tools work. So Andrew mentioned that all tools have a ticketing system, and they're all based on being able to do tickets. He's absolutely right. But what about those activities that are not ticket-based? And we're starting to see people demanding tools to support activities that are not ticket-based, things like capacity management and planning, things like disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning, things like demand forecasting, and so on and so forth. These need to be built into the tools. We're starting to see organizations moving beyond just those ticketing elements, incident problems and changes, etc., to looking at how their capacity or how their capabilities in technology enable them to support the strategy of the organization. So more and more, you're going to see IT groups being asked to step up into the business and to participate in those kind of activities. And our tools should be able to give us the information that we need to do that, including things like real-time status of critical components and services. Not just reports based on static data in a centralized CMDB. How do we get virtualized access to real-time data of the status of whatever it is that we're looking at? I'll stop there, but that I think is a good starting point for assessing what you're going to need to look for in a new generation tool.
Sure, and I recognize each one of these questions could give us a full day of conversations. Right. Jay, from your perspective, you're leading a team, right? You're trying to figure out what it is that you need. What are some of the must-haves that you heard from your team as you were thinking about implementing and using one of these platforms?
For IT itself, it was very heavy about assets and contract renewals and being able to report on those very succinctly, which again was a huge pain point for us, prior to coming to TDX. Over and above that, we're looking at other things of how we can add facilities and how we can add HR into what we're doing and give them pieces that they don't have now. Assets for facilities is actually huge, and it's something that right now is literally being done on a scratch pad. So as we move forward and keep implementing new things, we're finding all these extra features that are great for the different parts of the company that we never really thought we would be intertwined with. I'm not sure if that makes a whole lot of sense, but we never really thought that we would come up with a single system that would be utilized across several different departments. And this is certainly working its way towards that, because, you know, these pieces that they have been talking about, but not to us, obviously, because they didn't think IT would be some place to go for little things like how do we manage our inventory. You know, it's now become part of us, and now we're working more closely together to try and figure those things out. And it's again, it's a big bonus for us to be able to go that route. I mean, we've been around a long time, but IT has never been a big part of a construction industry, and you know, BNI's really kind of gotten into that over the last 8 to 10 years, and they're really ramping it up even more. So getting to this point and finding this kind of tool, to me, really makes me feel like we're going to be able to, you know, take things to another level quite quickly.
Yeah, and you know, it goes beyond just having that integration or the ability to answer the needs of different departments. You also have to have that cross departmental view of things, so that you actually understand what's happening. It's not, you know, you're not just reintroducing new silos with new tools. So that's right. Yeah, that's critical stuff. Andrew talked a lot about pain points in the early part of this, and what are some of the critical questions in terms of factors like systems administration overhead and training requirements, integration efforts, et cetera, that you found critical to address, Jay?
For me, and you know, obviously I'm going strictly from personal experience based on, you know, what I was dealing with here, but you know, in our old ITSM solution, any type of, you know, customization or changes was, I mean, it was a project in and of itself. And most of the time it was not something that I could figure out on my own, unfortunately, because the documentation on the web for it was very, very poor. I would have to call support. I'd have to wait for them. It would be, you know, hours or days before they'd come back. So the fact that I can administer this so much more easily, you know, I actually found an issue in one of my workflows yesterday. And again, this morning, actually, I found a different workflow that had an issue. It would have been 2 or 3 days to correct those issues had I been on the old system, but here it was literally just a few minutes. So having that simplicity of being able to make those changes that quickly and not holding things up and not, you know, oh, well, hang on, you know, I'm going to have to correct that. I'm going to have to find out how to correct that before we can move forward and do something else. Here, it was very simple to learn. The customizations are immediate, they're instant, they're so simple. Again, having to deal with what we had and moving to this has been a huge change for us, and it's been a big change in how we function. It's streamlined a lot of stuff. The customizations, again, are just so simple and so quick and so easy. We have made massive strides I mean, we didn't get this in until mid-September, and everybody here, it's a small IT team, it's 4 of us. We absolutely love it. Because anybody can ask me for something and I can say, oh, yeah, okay. Report writing has been incredible. It's one of the best pieces that we've seen. We tried to write reports before, and it was all based in SQL, and they wanted you to know specific SQL commands, and you had to figure this, and you had to figure that. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm also not the dumbest, but, you know, trying to figure out SQL on the fly to get information is not a simple task. So being able to, you know, 4 clicks and have a report that gives me all my closed tickets, or have the opportunity to select what engineer I want it from in another click, and absolutely amazing for us. So the pain points that we had, the report writing, the customization options, those kind of things were all taken care of.
It sounds like that also has a direct and very positive impact on your training requirements.
Absolutely.
Andrew, what are some of the additional challenges that organizations have to consider, especially as you're talking about a solution that you're going to implement to easily transfer, or transition, I should say, from pure ITSM to a true ESM platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one of the biggest questions that goes unanswered through a selection process is really understanding, what is it like to live with this system day in and day out? Right? What is it like to care for the system, to feed the system, right, to make it do what you want? And I think a key piece of that, there's a couple. Number one is, you know, how will it enable you going forward? And just a couple things to think about there. if you're really thinking about enterprise service management, as Jay was talking about, the expansion into other departments, are they going to be able to own and maintain their area of the system without IT's help? Because what we find from an IT perspective is that IT loves to be an enabler with technology, but they're not looking for new hobbies. And if the system can be owned and maintained 85% of the time by HR or by marketing, that's a big deal. And it usually makes those departments happy too, because if they need an extra field on a form, they can get it without having to come to IT. And IT likes it because they don't have to deal with these small requests coming in. So that's one thing to think about. The other is thinking longer term about how does the solution integrate with other tools to support automation. I believe that is so fundamental for any sort of service management tool going forward. I mean, that for the future of service management, I think we're going to be talking, when you talk about service management, automation is going to be a huge part of that conversation, because we're seeing the demands of service groups increase. Point solutions are being implemented, teams are growing, but we often see that the service areas of the organization don't grow as quickly. I think that's one thing we just don't want to get wrong. How flexible is the integration automation, and how adaptable? So what I mean by that is, I think most solutions have APIs where they'll say, hey, we connect to Salesforce or X, Y, and Z. But what does that really mean? Because when you peel the cover back, is that going to do everything you need it to do? And what we're finding is that clients want, and users of service management platforms, yes, they may need to connect to Salesforce, Workday, but those systems have hundreds, if not thousands, of endpoints. And very seldomly are just the out-of-the-box automation integration capabilities sufficient. So how easy is it to say, well, that out-of-the-box integration automation doesn't do what I need it to do, but I can tweak that. Can we do that? Because what happens is, if we have a business process, take onboarding. That is so ripe for addressing, because everyone hates it and it's prone to error. It takes forever. And think about all the different tools and the nuances. So the other thing to think about when you think about automation around service management is the integration automation platform specifically focused at just the service management tool? Meaning, if I can connect with something, I can connect from service management to Salesforce, right? Well, what if my process requires Salesforce to connect with the ERP system, and then the ERP system to connect with another tool that we're using for demand forecasting? That's where it gets really tricky, because in order to truly automate, it's not just about connecting your service management platform with another tool. Most often, there are other tools that need to talk. So as you're evaluating, I think that's a really important thing, just because I think the automation conversation is so important, especially over the next 5 years. I think we're going to be within 5 years. When you talk about service management, it's just assumed that you mean automation as well as what we, have historically viewed as service management.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Things are working a little slow today. And I guess the good news is we just wrapped up our State of Contact Center. Now, this, they're not exactly the same, but there are a lot of the same issues that contact center management has to deal with, similar to service management. And what we're seeing from that is that the increase in plans to add or upgrade automation and AI-driven automation is definitely up from previous surveys. So I suspect that is more the case on the service management side. David, what are some of the challenges that you're helping clients deal with in terms of system admin overhead and training requirements, integration efforts, et cetera, as they're thinking about or moving into deploying a service management platform?
So there are a few of them, but I'd like to comment on one thing that Andrew said, which I think was just really well stated, and I really liked what he said, and that is, how is the tool to live with? And what that says to me, a lot of the challenges that we have is that people use parts of the tool not as an operational tool. In other words, not as part of what their job is and how they work, but they use it as some sort of reference. And when that happens, it's very difficult to actually get the real value out of the tool. It needs to become an operational component of what we do. It needs to become part of our lives. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to make our jobs easier and more pleasant. It needs to, it needs to extend our capability beyond what we can do on our own. And I think that it's sometimes challenging for people to accept that kind of reliance on the tool set. But it's really important to do that. And I see there's a question from Colleen in the in the Q&A about scaling and knowledge management. You're absolutely right. When we suddenly expand the scope of our solution, and we now depend on people to submit knowledge articles across the whole scope of the organization, it can get very tricky if those people just view it as sort of a reference work, if they don't see it as part of a very important work that they're doing every day. So, for example, I have one organization, they have 2 people in knowledge management, and it is their job to write the knowledge articles. For, an organization that gets thousands of incidents a day, it's just not scalable. And especially when you want to move that into the business operations part of it, it really is just not scalable. And yet it's really difficult for this particular organization to get the technical groups in the organization, whether they are business technology or whether they are IT groups, beyond the service desk to take ownership of writing knowledge articles. In spite of the fact that by doing so, it will make their job a whole lot easier, because we can fuel more effective self-help. We can make service desk analysts a lot more effective by having access to advanced knowledge and so on. So when we start viewing these extended capabilities in the tool as operational components, they become a lot more easy to use. When we live with them effectively, they become a lot more effective to scale as well. And that is certainly, I think, a challenge that needs to be overcome. It's a cultural aspect. This is not just a tool that is in the hands of the privileged few. This is a tool that we all use as part of getting our everyday job done. That transition needs to be made. Just a couple of other things. One of the most important things that we struggle with is getting the basics right. There is a school of thought which says, well, the tool takes care of the basics, you don't have to. And in doing that, organizations lose the basic skill sets that you absolutely have to have for a tool to work effectively. Things like incident categorization. How do you define the priority of an incident correctly? Well, the tool's going to do that. There's a code for that. No, actually, the tool cannot, in any world, understand the impact of a particular type of incident on the physical activity in the organization, or on the politics of the organization, or on the relationships between people in that organization. You have to understand those things yourself so that you can set up the tool to be successful in doing that. And a lot of organizations have kind of assumed that the tools are going to do that, and they kind of let that piece slide. For many organizations, one of the things that I have to do is to really go back to some of these basic things. What is an incident? Why is it different to problem management? Why is the incident and the service desk not the same thing? They're actually, one is a process, one is an organization. How do they fit together? And how does incident management work within engineering teams and development teams? What is the integration there? We often have to find ourselves going back to some of those basics. And then the third one that we really struggle with is this idea of the CMDB. It is still a huge issue for many organizations. And it's basically an issue because there is an assumption that all data needs to be in the CMDB in case you need it. The better way of doing it is figuring out which data is important and then focusing on how you're going to access that data. But I find that there's often a challenge in getting that sequence right. So it comes back to, I think, what a couple of people have said earlier on. First, understand what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then figure out what is the data that you need to do it, what are the processes you need to do it, and how does the tool support all of that. I think that's the right sequence. But very often we say, well, we have a problem. We're not sure what the scope of this is. We don't know how we're going to solve it. So let's get a tool in. They seem to have the answers. And as long as we apply the tool effectively, we should be okay. It's not a foolproof method. Far better to work in reverse. Find out what the problem is, then work your way backwards all the way through to the tool. And then finally, I would just like to highlight one sort of longer term thing, and that is that I have to be careful to prevent this cycle of moving from problem to problem to problem. So we have a problem, we get a tool, we fix that problem. Everything is running smoothly, we breathe a huge sigh of relief, and before you know it, there's another problem that hits. Oh, we didn't think about that one. Now we need another tool, or we need to customize this tool so we can solve that problem. And I think one of the secrets to effective long-term success of using a tool is the ability to pivot from solving a problem into growing. So what more can we do with this tool? How much further can we actually take this? What future things can we do to make our lives easier and to make the lives of our colleagues in the organization better and easier? And I think that pivot from trouble mode to growth mode is very important. But very often we find that people are just so relieved that they've solved the problem that they're like, okay, don't touch anything in case we break something. Okay, but there's a very important pivot that needs to take place to take what we've learned and move it to the next level. The alternative, of course, is strategy by tool. And I'm not going to insert a tool name here, but we all know that some organizations will say, we're an X house. We're a tool A house. Whatever tool A vendor tells us we need to do, we're going to do. That's our strategy. It can work, but it's not the most effective way of working within an organization. So far better to do that thinking yourself, far better to get in with the business units in your organization, figure out where they're going, and put a strategy together on how your tool is going to support that. And then feed it back to the tool vendor to say, hey, it would be really cool if we had these features which would help us to do this. And tool vendors are only too willing to look for those new kind of features that come from your experience.
Yeah. Well, hold that thought, because we're going to go there at the very end of this session, David. But I think one of the points you made that I think about a lot, automation is absolutely necessary. It accomplishes a bunch of absolutely critical requirements, or addresses critical requirements. But one of the ways that IT is traditionally learned is you come in at the bottom of the pile, you learn by doing, you do a lot of that as grunt work. As that is taken over by automation, I do worry about how do we get people to a level 2 and a level 3 types of capabilities that they haven't had. But I'm not asking for an answer on this one. But if they haven't had that learning curve process from the beginning, and I think also it speaks a little bit to Jay's point around training and how do we write reports, and how do we share the knowledge, or know where the knowledge is. And Jay, would you like to touch on that a little bit on the knowledge base and the knowledge management?
Actually, yeah. One of the big things that we were looking for was how can we have our users help themselves? So, I mean, granted, we're just a simple IT team, but we do support almost 1,000 users. Most of them are in the field, which is an even bigger thing to have to deal with. So cloud-based was really important for us, and it worked out phenomenally. So just a quick little story to understand how knowledge base has helped us. which we didn't have previously, was we have a vendor who literally just told us last week that by mid-November, they're going to implement an update, and every one of our users has to recreate their account utilizing SSO. This is a big process. It's actually 20 steps to be able to recreate their account using the SSO. We have 287 users that need to do this. So my solution was I wrote a KB article, we put in screenshots, we put in steps. I handed that off to the managers and said, we need to have your users do this. And in a very short amount of time, many of them had done it, all just by being able to click on a knowledge base article. Now, if I had just taken those 20 steps and put them into an email, they would have scrolled for a few seconds and then said, yeah, I'm not reading this, and they would have just moved on. But being able to make it nice and pretty in the knowledge base, a simple click, everything is there. We have already found that because we have put, and don't get me wrong, we have a long way to go with our knowledge base, but as we're doing things, we're adding these articles and we're able to put them out there, and we're finding that our users are actually going to it and looking to see if there's something about their problem before they put in a ticket, which is humongous for us because, again, they don't have direct calls. They have to email us is the way that works, because we just don't have the ability to have somebody answer a phone. So the fact that they're willing to go out to the knowledge base, look for the article before putting in a ticket, has made a great impact on us. We've actually seen, even though it's only been a couple of weeks, a small impact in how many tickets we're getting in a day, because some of them are going and getting the answer on their own. So, and again, the field portion of it, somebody has a password issue or something like that, it's out in the knowledge base. So they can, boom, they're just clicking on it and they're going, oh, okay, I just do this. And they're able to follow the instructions right there in the field, and they fix their own problem. So the knowledge base is a big, big thing, and it has already in such a short time has had a huge impact for us.
Yeah, I can imagine. Andrew, I know we've gotten a little bit off script here, and I apologize to everybody for that. That's kind of my job, and I may have dropped out a little bit. But I guess we're talking about in-house capabilities, right? So as a vendor, you're bringing a whole load of capabilities and offering that to your clients. But obviously, at some point, they're going to take this over. Folks like Jay's team are going to have to actually run this stuff. What are some of the in-house capabilities that these organizations really need to think about and prepare for and get set up ahead of time?
Yeah, sure. So, I think that along the lines of what Jay was saying, I think an understanding of some of the processes that are going to be supported. So, for example, KCS, we think is a great framework for knowledge management. So, knowledge-centered service. It's easy to get people certified. It's not very expensive. Creates a great career path. I think that's excellent. I think having an understanding of who the system owner is, who the admins are going to be, those are some of the things to think about. And, it's funny when you choose sysadmins, clearly you can choose people who have an understanding of other technologies and are sysadmins for other solutions. We often see that it's somebody who is also a bit of an SME, so somebody who understands service management, right? And they're looking for an expansion of their skill set or career. I think that's important to pick the right people to own a solution internally as well.
Yeah, and I think about this, and I think one of the other kind of skill sets that perhaps was not part of the IT teams, toolbox in the past is communication, right? And I'm talking about human communications. How do you work with the folks from HR? How do you work with the folks from facilities? And learn how to speak the same language so that you understand what they're asking you for and they understand what you're telling them or what you need from them in terms of understanding their processes, et cetera. So I think that's a change that's happening in IT. I think it's a very healthy one as well. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing, right? So I'm going to start with David, then we'll go to Jay, and I'm going to ask you, Andrew, to wrap up our discussion. What are some of the high-value capabilities that customers are either asking for or thinking about, and that they can actually expect to see emerging over the next 12, 18 months? And again, David, I'm going to start with you. I will note we're down to about 15 minutes, so we've got plenty of time for everybody to go a little nuts. David, go ahead.
All right. So a couple of things that I'm looking at. First of all, is increased focus on value streams. So the ability for different groups in the organization to have a common view of how they contribute to value streams, which are the end-to-end activities that take place to produce products and services that are sold to external customers. So what is our contribution in IT? What is our contribution in HR? So ESM, I think, is gonna start evolving from being, okay, we'll put a service desk in the HR department, to being, at this point, IT contributes to the value stream in this way. At this point, HR contributes in this way. At this point, both HR and IT collaborate to contribute and provide this contribution into the value stream. I certainly think that tools are going to start reflecting that view of what's happening in the organization. I think the second thing that's gonna happen is a lot more of the cloud management capability. It's already started to come into a lot of the tools. I think that is going to become a very strong feature as more and more organizations use cloud, and especially as organizations use cloud solutions, software as a service solutions in the business units, and where those business units have started to take on the responsibility of customizing and managing those solutions from IT. That's all very well to say, well, we're going to do it on our own, but they still rely on certain standards, policies, and infrastructure that comes from IT. So how do we support that environment where some of the technology is embedded in the business unit, but it is still has some level of support from within IT? So I think we're going to see some of that capability. And then I think another thing that we're going to see more of is the concept of the portfolio, and not just a project portfolio, not just a service portfolio, but a portfolio of capabilities which says, here are the things that we can do. Here is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how they all map together. This is where we need additional investment. This is where we're getting return on investment, and this is how we're measuring it all in the entire life cycle. So as we move closer and closer into a more consolidated business and IT kind of scenario, those portfolios, the ability to see what technology we have, how it's being used, what the value of that technology is going to become a lot more important. I will say one other thing that I want to end with on this. There has been a bit of a free for all in the industry in the past 8 years, where a lot of new frameworks come up, and there've been a very sort of not very vocal, but there has been a bit of a framework battle. Which one do we go for? Which one is best for us? And we've kind of learned that there's some good in all of the frameworks. But I think the important thing to recognize is that it is not a free-for-all. Different people in the organization don't get to decide that they're going to use a completely different framework that is completely inconsistent with the way in which others in the organization works. So I think tools are going to come up with features that enable us to use multiple frameworks together, but in a way that is coordinated, in a way that actually contributes to the overall creation of value. So those are my forecasts.
Yeah, and I think that the concept of value stream is absolutely critical. Aside from ITIL, I would love for HR departments to start sending their folks to HDI for training. It would be nice for us, but that's not going to happen. But I think that the concept of value, where do we add value? Where are the pain points that we can fix together? Really is a very important way of thinking that needs to spread. And I think it does spread as we move into ESM, right? Because without that, I don't think the most ESM projects or initiatives, or I keep trying to come up with a new word for these activities, but I just think that that's absolutely going to be required to make these things successful. And it sounds like also, David, what you're saying, we're moving beyond service catalog, right? So the catalog is one thing, but we don't necessarily understand the value of each of those items within the catalog. And I think that perhaps is a little bit of where you see things going, where we can actually start to understand beyond just a simple list of here's what we do, but here's why we do it.
Yeah, I think for me, if I could just wrap up on that to give an example, I mean, it's not an IT example, but I lived in New York for a while. And the thing about New York is that things change really quickly. Neighborhoods change very quickly. And a restaurant in that neighborhood can need to be a completely different. So I may be in Little Italy today, and in 5 years' time, I'm in Chinatown. Do you keep your Italian restaurant, or do you evolve to a Chinese restaurant? If you do that, not only does your menu change, that's the service catalog, but you have to look at all of the recipes. You have to look at the utensils. You have to look at the training that the chefs have to go through, and so on and so forth. And those kind of decisions can only be made from a portfolio. They cannot be made from a catalog. So, to me, that illustrates the difference. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that functionality coming into tools in future.
Yeah. Jay, I know it's early days for you on this, but what what's on your wish list? What would you like to see on the roadmap? What do you think you'll see on the roadmap going forward?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't have much for this in a global sense. I'm really kind of stuck with it just in how I'm dealing with it. For us, we're looking to, in the next 12 months or so have, facilities fully up and running on this so that they're able to, better manage what they're doing. It's so much simpler to, people already know to put in a ticket for IT. So to be able to train our users to do the same thing because the toilet's clogged or the sink is leaking or, whatever the case is, that'll be easy enough, but getting that the ragtag group of, facilities people who are used to just running around and whatnot to be able to focus on taking a ticket and looking at it and understanding it and then going and doing the work. It's also going to help in a sense of, do we have enough people for what they're trying to do? Are they bumping into each other trying to accomplish things? And having a system like this that we can utilize is going to help that a lot.
Great. And Andrew, as I said, we're going to let you take us out today. What are some of the things, without asking me to sign an NDA, what are some of the things that are on the roadmap at Team Dynamics, and what are customers asking for that you think?
Yeah, sure. And I think from I'll speak more directionally from an industry perspective, and I think there's just a increased focus on how do we serve customers most effectively, and what I mean by that is, how do we create the right content that helps self-service? How do we engage with a customer most quickly when a human being needs to be involved? And also, how do we use automation to our advantage? Meaning, how does it improve service to a customer and reduce risk and error, expand what we deliver 24/7, 365? And I think we're starting to see this sort of automation-first mindset, which essentially is, as we're thinking about our services, just asking the question, what can we automate here, and is automation appropriate? And there are many times where automation is not the answer. But the idea is, with a properly implemented automation strategy, that the activities that aren't appropriate for automation, that we're putting more energy into. We're doing a better job. Our technicians are no longer chopping through a stack of what we consider the mundane toil of IT that makes them dislike their jobs. And we're able to engage our customers, internal or external, face-to-face or virtually, however we're going to do that, but we're working with other human beings more quickly and more thoroughly than we were before. And then also, I think you're going to see the conversion of conversational AI and automation as well. So I think you're going to see a lot there. But yeah, I think those are really the two things. I think one takeaway is that for people is just that automation first mindset. Anytime we talk about a service, we ask the questions, what can be automated and is it appropriate for us to reach our goals?
Great. We do have a few questions, so I'm going to go ahead and ask some of these. I'll encourage the audience to continue to ask questions. We have about a little over 5 minutes here, so it'd be great if we get some more questions in here. One of the questions was, how important is it in terms of a vendor bringing their implementation capabilities versus securing a third party? And of course, that's interesting since we have a vendor and a third party and a end customer on the call, but I'll let you start with that, Andrew. I mean, what is your view? What are you hearing from folks in terms of, how much of the sale impact is there in terms of bringing your own implementation team and offering that to the customer along with everything else that you're bringing?
Yeah, I think there's no one size fits all. There are instances where I have very, very simple needs, right? I manage incidents and help desk tickets, and sometimes, and that's about it. And sometimes a solution that I can enter a credit card in and log in right and get going right away is the right tool. There are other instances, especially if you think of large organizations, your Fortune 50 organizations, where we're going to be deploying something globally. It's going to be highly customized. And so it's appropriate to bring in a huge consulting partner to help us do this, right? The Accentures, Deloitte, that type of thing. Most organizations fall in between that. And I think that that's where a solution provider and their teams can certainly be of help, because they both have knowledge of the solution and also the business processes. In our case, we like it because it's a way to ensure quality of implementation and cost control. As a professional services organization's business is to generate revenue on professional services. Our goal is to help people become really successful with the software, right? And so if we can provide great services and have a lower TCO for people to be successful with software, that's great. We're really successful as an organization if our customers love the product and they want to use more of it and they buy more of it. And that's the objective. And so I would say too that, if there is a lot of business process work to do prior to thinking of a tool, that's where I think services firms become really, really helpful. Whether it's a services firm like ours that we're tied to the product, or to someone with knowledge, right, of how do we approach these business problems? What's appropriate for us? That huge library of ITIL or the other frameworks, what's really relevant? What do we really need to focus on? What processes do we need to improve before we get a tool? There's the opportunity to pave a lot of cow paths with an ITSM solution or service management platform if you don't think about what can be better. And I think that if the need is really on business process engineering, that's where strategic services and services firms become super, super helpful.
David, I'd like your perspective on that, especially, given the point you made earlier about, it's no longer, from the days of IBM, people were like, we're an IBM shop, we're a Unisys shop. I'm going to show my age here. We're a Sperry, shop. But, what's your perspective on that?
No, I think Andrew's absolutely right. It's a matter of, who are you and what do you need? There's no one size fits all. I do think, though, that just two things. Number one, if you're assuming that a software provider, that the tool provider is going to give you direct access to their developers, some will, some won't. So check that assumption. It's not always the case. I've worked for software vendors, and I can tell you that they generally did not provide direct access to developers. Developers were called in to solve extreme problems. Generally, you were dealing with senior architects and implementation specialists who were really good, but we had as good resources, even better in some cases, working in partner organizations. So for me, it's more a matter of cultural fit. Do you gel with the provider that you're going to use? Do they understand you? Do they get you? Do they understand what you're trying to achieve? That's the most important thing. And the second thing I wanted to say is when you're dealing with a cloud service provider, such as a software as a service provider, it is very rare that you will actually get the software, the service provider themselves to provide the implementation services. It does happen, but remember that cloud services are based on selling a very commoditized version of a product to thousands of customers. They prefer to work through partners who will do the customizations and so on and so forth. But again, that varies from provider to provider. So the answer is just do your due diligence and make sure that any assumptions you make are validated.
Jay, I'd be curious, as a relatively, they're not a huge organization. You're not certainly not a huge IT team. What's your perspective on that? Having the software provider bring that in versus you having to go out and find a third party. That may, in fact, understand your business very well, though, right?
So we had that option. We had the option of utilizing an implementation team, and we had the option of finding a third party. We could go either way. We didn't choose either one of those. We decided to do a self-implementation.
Okay.
But knowing that they were there was a bigger help than anything else. Over and above that, the fact that, the support that is offered was absolutely huge, and it was very, very quick. We still had a project implementation team who was available almost any time we needed them. If I posted a question, I got an answer pretty hot and picking quick. So it was really, really helpful. But we did think about, should we utilize the implementation team? And the reason we didn't is because we are small enough that we felt we really wanted to know the nuts and bolts of the system from the ground up. So we didn't want someone else to do it for us. Even though we would be there and we'd be watching and we'd be part of it, we all felt that we would do better in learning it if we were the ones actually doing the implementation. And it was a simple enough system that it was great to do it that way.
Makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank everybody in the audience who joined us. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Andrew, for participating. And thanks again to Team Dynamics for sponsoring today's session. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email that's going to include a link to view a recording of today's presentation. So if you did find this helpful, please share that link with your colleagues. Once you leave the event, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We very much appreciate it if you go ahead and share your feedback on the webinar. It helps us make sure that our programs fit your interests and accomplish what you need us to accomplish. So thanks again to everybody, and have a great day.